Test 1, 2. Got me?
Yep.
All right.
Test, Robert Daskell Clemens.
Gotcha.
Okay, Chairman, you can start your meeting.
Okay, thank you. All right, the meeting of the Public Utilities Committee will now come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Balmer,
Present.
Alderwoman Negracia,
Present.
Alderman Oldenburg, Alderwoman Navarro,
Present.
Alderman Narayan, Alderman Todd, Chairman,
Present. Todd is present.
Chairman Coder,
Here.
Alderman Oldenburg, Alderman Narayan. 5 present, you have quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, we'll save excuse Alderman to the end. I know Alderman Oldenburg can't be here today, but we'll see if Alderman Narayan joins us. I'll entertain a motion for approval of the minutes from the Thursday, June 18th, 2020 committee meeting.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved by Alderwoman from the 6th, seconded by Alderman from the 10th for approval of the June 18th, 2020 minutes. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Minutes from June 18th are passed. So for today, I know we've got a number of folks here to talk about small cell and 5G. We also have some folks here on Board Bill 41, which is a board bill I'm sponsoring involving the downtown steam loop. So what I'd like to do is start with that and try to limit our discussion there to 15 or 20 minutes or so we can dive into small cell and be cognizant of everyone's time and make sure committee members can get to their health committee hearing immediately following this. So I guess I will kick off some discussion with Board Bill 41, and then I'm going to probably turn it over briefly to Rich Bradley and then to Mason Miller from Ashley Energy, and then take questions from the committee. So Board Bill 41 is something we've been working on for a while. It is basically a board bill that it will impact really only downtown and the area that the steam loop services. And what we're seeking to do is incentivize projects that are receiving incentives to stay on or join the steam loop that covers downtown. The customer base of the steam loop has shrunk over the years, in part due to poor management by the previous operator, not the current folks who run Ashley. I think they've been a wonderful partner with the city, and we really want to encourage developments that are receiving public incentives to look seriously at this option. So what this seeks to do is basically, if you're approved for incentives through the normal process, through SLDC and through all the financial modeling, you basically would get a boost on top of that if you decide to use the steam loop. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rich Bradley to just give some thoughts generally about the steam loop, because he's been working on this for years. Then I'd like Mason to chime in, and then we'll take questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if you don't know, SWMDC, Solid Waste Management and Development Corporation, owns the steam loop. Solid Waste Management is a non-for-profit that is related to the city. And basically, I am the president of that corporation. Steve Conway is the vice president, and Jamie Wilson, who's also on the line here, is the secretary treasurer. And so it's a very interesting setup in the 1970s when a model of trash to energy at the Ashley plant didn't come to fruition. The city, SWMDC, took over the distribution loop. As the Alderman said, we work very closely with Ashley Energy to provide steam to somewhere north of about 80 customers in the downtown core. Of those 80 customers, 11 city buildings are on the loop, plus portions of the America Center. It's critical that this loop stay in functionality for a number of reasons. Many of those facilities, including all the city buildings, have no boilers. So there is no boiler system as a backup. There is no place to put a boiler system. It would be a major capital expenditure to add the infrastructure needed in all these buildings to provide heat. And so, us being the major customer on the loop and the steam loop being, nowhere near its capacity, as the chairman stated, we need to pick up more customers. More customers mean less cost to everybody, but in particular, it means less cost to the city. Right now, I'll put my other hat on as BPS president and tell you that our steam bill for the year for the city is somewhere around $2.1 million. So, in a perfect world, if we could add more people to the loop, and by this incentivization of this board bill, the actual cost of our steam would hopefully go down in time. So, Ashley's done an outstanding job. I will tell you guys, I started this in 2009 when I was appointed in this position as a function of my job. I've been the president since 2009. I'm the day-to-day guy that works with the steam people. And I could tell you guys that the previous owner of the steam plant was a nightmare. It was unbelievable what they did. I spent, so many hours working on that with our attorneys and other people trying to ward off evils that when, Mason and his group came along and Ashley and picked this up in 2017, which by the way, when they picked it up in 2017, we signed a 20-year agreement with them, long-term agreement with a lot of great stuff in it. We were very happy, as far as our expenditures for capital improvements, repairs, maintenance. These guys have absolutely just been, the savior of this whole program. So with that, I'll stop talking. And if you guys have a specific question I can answer, I'd be glad to do it.
Thanks. Why don't we run through the list and see if there's any questions for Rich? Well, you know what? Let's let Mason chime in first, and then we'll just take questions from the committee. So Mason Miller, who's the CEO of Ashley Energy, which runs the steam plant. For those who aren't familiar, the Ashley plant is the big power plant sort of just north of the landing along the riverfront. For those who maybe aren't as familiar and who are tuning in from St. Louis, outside of St. Louis. So with that, Mason, why don't you talk to us about, what you've done and your sort of journey to owning this plant and sort of what you envision in the future.
Sure. Thank you, Jack. And can everyone hear me okay? Sometimes these
We can hear you.
systems don't work. Great. First of all, Rich, I appreciate the favorable commentary. When we purchased the Ashley plant from Veolia in 2017, we did so with the mindset that this is a partnership with the city. We are inextricably linked together and linked together in a manner that'll hopefully pull the energy infrastructure underneath the city into the 21st century and beyond. I am a self-professed energy nerd. That there's no really better way to describe me. I spend my days thinking about ways to create energy more efficiently, more environmentally friendly, and in a manner that allows a long-term successful grid and power system. That's why I love Ashley Energy. That's why I love District Energy. The system here was built originally right after the World's Fair. That building was the leading symbol of St. Louis as the center of the energy world. Of course, that was a carbon-centered world. It was a coal-fired plant. But it's somewhat symbolic that same building, that same system, I think, can lead St. Louis into the energy leadership in a post-carbon world. In 1999, that plant was rebuilt with what they called a cogeneration system, not by my predecessor, but by two companies before that. Cogeneration plants are the most energy efficient district energy system available. They take a single unit of energy, in this case natural gas, and turns it into three different things. It turns it into electricity. Then while that electricity is generated, the byproduct, the steam from that, is turned into heat. And then as that heat is turned into low pressure steam, it turns into more electricity. And so for the same single fire of gas, you end up with 3 units of power. In other cities that have grown their district energy systems, like Minneapolis, St. Paul, that now supplies 80% of the central business district heat and cooling. And that's reduced greenhouse gas emissions by over 200,000 tons per year. Sulfur dioxide, particulate emissions by 60%. Same is true in Detroit, Boston, university systems like Cornell and Princeton. St. Louis has that same opportunity. When we took over, we not only agreed, but we're excited about the opportunity to invest capital into improving the efficiency of the system, into cutting edge technologies like inlet air cooling, like renewable integration, like thermal energy storage, like district cooling. And we've done so, and we're going to continue to do so. But all of that is a function of being able to develop a customer base. That growing customer base helps provide the capital to continue to reinvest. And it also provides the ability for the city to have a stable infrastructure underneath its operations, the jail, the courthouses, all of the city buildings. Like Rich said, we view this as right now a 20-year contract, but this is a 20, 30, 40-year project. That requires capital, but that requires a commitment to a long-term growth as well. And so if anyone had any questions about how we operate or how we do things, I'm happy to answer them. I know a few of you have seen the plant, and I'm always excited to talk about it with folks. So with that, I'll stop talking and let you all ask any questions.
Thank you, Mason and Rich. So, and I want to note, this board bill's been in the works for a while. This is something we've worked on closely with SLDC and the mayor's office on the language. So let's take questions from the committee. I'll go down the list here. Alderman Vollmer.
Thank you, Jack. No questions at all. I'm familiar with what they're talking about, and it's a wonderful thing that we need to do. But thank you very much for the opportunity to ask.
Thanks. Alderwoman Ingracia.
No questions. Thank you.
All right. Alderwoman Navarro.
Thank you. I do have a couple of questions, and I don't know if maybe these are more for Mason. I was able to tour the plant. I don't know if that was a year or two ago, so grateful to have had that opportunity in preparation for this conversation. So right now I know that we're burning natural gas to create the steam, and I appreciate all the upgrades and energy efficiency on that end. Is there anything long-term? Is there anything else that we can be essentially burning and combusting as we look towards the future and trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? I mean, what do you see in the future in that realm, or 40, 50 years still going to be natural gas?
No, you're absolutely right. And that is the long-term view I think that everyone should have. Ultimately, the district energy system should be part of a synergistic, renewable and recyclable system within a city. Now, realize I'm telling you this with a 30 or 40 year outlook. I'm not suggesting that any of this is in the works in a technical standpoint yet. But, we have a wastewater system at MSD that produces a huge amount of organic biomass and byproduct. Right now, there's incinerators there. There's technology that allows you to use anaerobic digestion and capture the gas that's created from that. The problem is that what do you do with that gas once you have renewable natural gas? Well, you can try to get it into the pipeline or turn it into LNG, liquid natural gas, but there's not always an offtake, especially because the wastewater system is 24/7 and people using LNG in trucks is not. Ultimately, we would be a perfect destination for that renewable natural gas. You could end up in a system where our wastewater is turned into gas, which creates our heat and our electricity to run our cooling systems, and even creates the electricity to run the wastewater system to begin with. There's opportunities for solar, not enough to run the entire system, but certainly enough to peak shave, right? To allow grid reduction at a point at which there's heavy stress on it, like in high cooling times. There's opportunities for district cooling. That is a huge opportunity to reduce efficiencies on a building by building basis. In other words, if you take our excess steam, and this will sound counterintuitive, but in the middle of the summer, you take our excess steam, because we always have a base load, and you take the electricity that generates, and you can take that steam and put it through what they call an absorption chiller and create air conditioning out of it. And likewise, you can take that electricity and run an electric chiller. And so for the same reason that you can create these efficiencies of scale, you can recapture waste heat, all of these are the types of things that will, I think, ultimately be the reason district energy grows, not just here, but elsewhere. Most people, I think, will say that cities are the place and need to be the leaders in an environment to change dependency on global carbon emissions. You have to start at the city level. We represent, in the cities around the world, 70% of the carbon emissions come from cities. And so you have to tackle it one city at a time, one system at a time, and reduce peak load and peak usage one user at a time. So is that the big picture? Yes. Is that going to happen from this bill? No. But that's the view we have long term.
Okay, thank you. And then my other questions are more about the bill. And so I don't know, Chairman, if this would be for you or maybe this is for Rich Bradley. Currently, PACE funding is not available to come off the steam loop, correct?
I don't know if it currently is. Rich, can you speak to that? I mean, I don't, or Mason, do you know the answer to that? Can you use PACE financing currently to come off the steam loop?
You can. We had one user, and this is prior to our ownership, a user actually used PACE funding to shift and purchase a less efficient boiler to install in their building, and they left the loop. We have since gotten them partially back on the loop, and we'll get them the rest of the way there too. But yeah, it's been used before.
Okay, because I talked to someone on the board earlier and who said that they were not allowed to approve financing for people to move off the loop. But
And Alderwoman, they may have a policy to that respect now, but I know early on that wasn't the case, and we were sort of counterintuitively incentivizing projects to leave the system that the city partially owns. I think that, through discussions with Mason and others, that's probably not happening as much, and this is just sort of going to further make sure it doesn't.
gotcha. And I know I want to get to the other item on our agenda as well, so I won't ask any more questions. I'll just say I think the thing that I would like to learn more about is just the efficiency of the system itself in terms of what are the options that building owners have. Because that's some of the things that I'm hearing is that there are other more efficient options for them than joining the steam loop at this time. And, how does that play out? And just understanding a little bit more about, what financing options are available, and how this would play out, I guess, for building owners, because we are doing so much in terms of helping building owners. I mean, with the building energy performance standards, there's just a lot going on right now for building owners to upgrade. And so understanding how this plays into that is something that I'm definitely interested in learning a little bit more about. But I'll hold those questions off for another time.
Thanks, Alderwoman. And it looks like Alderman Narayan joined us. Alderman Narayan, any questions?
No questions for me. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. Alderman Todd.
Is there a plan for maximum feasible participation for minorities as far as contracts and jobs are concerned?
I will defer to whether, I don't know if that's a Rich Bradley question or a Mason question.
So I guess my comment to that would be, as you know, we have, the city has our mayor's executive order and actually our new ordinance for participation. Because the steam loop itself belongs to the city, and the plant itself belongs to a private entity, those particular requirements do not necessarily apply to what's happening here. Mason, you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, and I guess my comment would be similar in a sense. We don't, as the steam plant owner, have any influence into what goes on inside a particular building when they build it or how they do their connections or construction projects. We don't have any say in that. I can tell you, having worked with Chris, who's on the call, and some of our views toward the area we're in, I think it's important that the projects we do at the plant to the extent we have any projects going on, construction, development, or otherwise, that we adhere to not only those guidelines, but frankly to the civic duty that we should be doing that sort of stuff.
Thank you. And Alderman Todd, I would add, this bill would primarily impact projects, large development projects downtown, well in excess of $1 million, meaning, all the city's MWBE requirements would come into play. So to the extent, developers either rehabbing or building new and they're working on their mechanical systems, yes, they can be using, any minority participation on the, mechanical contractors and things would count towards their participation goals.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Mr. Goodson.
Chairman, if I could just say a few comments. I want to say something to Alderman Todd. Alderman Todd, good morning. Chris Goodson.
Good morning. Good morning.
Yep. As Mason mentioned, my involvement here has been twofold. One, I was intrigued on how we could get more users in downtown on the loop. As President Bradley mentioned, when you get more private users on, you help bring down the cost of the city. So that was one reason. The other reason, though, is to bring exactly what Chairman Coder just said, other groups within the city and businesses involved in the building around the loop. So me, and you can count on it. We'll be promoting that and influencing that any way we can.
Thank you so much.
All right. Any further questions from members of the committee? Okay, I'm hearing none. I'll make a motion to adopt Board Bill 41 with a due pass recommendation.
Second.
It's been moved by me, the Alderman from the 7th, seconded by Alderman Vollmer. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderman Vollmer,
Aye.
Alderwoman Negracia,
Aye.
Alderman Oldenburg, Alderwoman Navarro,
Aye.
Alderman Ryan,
Aye.
Alderman Todd,
Aye.
Chairman Coder.
Aye.
6 aye votes.
All right. With 6 aye votes, Board Bill 41 has been adopted by the committee with a due pass recommendation. Thanks everybody from Ashley and from the city who helped, introduce this today and discuss and keeping it pretty much within our time limits. With that, we're going to turn to our next agenda item, which is a discussion of 5G and small cell. Some introductory comments. We're doing this here today because I know some telecoms are now in the process of actually rolling out small cell in the neighborhoods. We're seeing polls going up. We're certainly getting calls. So what I was hoping we could do is we'll kind of walk through the process, both from the city side and then hear from Verizon, who I know is right now, working in many neighborhoods to expand 5G, and hear from them about the technology and their plans and everything else. And also, I would note we did invite, I know Leroy Grant who represents AT&T is here as well, and Mr. Pickle couldn't make it today. I know he was having knee surgery, so let's keep him in our thoughts. So with that, I'm going to turn it over. I guess we're going to start with Dr. Gaskell Clemens, the city's Chief Technology Officer.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. There's 3 things primarily that I would like to cover. First, how we got here. Second, the benefits of 5G, and then where we're at as far as our market standing with the carriers. So for those of you who don't remember, this all started when the state passed legislation and the FCC passed regulations regarding the deployment of small wireless facilities and placed some pretty hefty restrictions on what municipalities can and can't do. For instance, we have to allow the wireless carriers to co-locate on our streetlight poles, which means we have to let them build these small wireless facilities. There are some very strict restrictions on how and when we can say no. For instance, the only times we can say no is if it's an issue of public safety or if there's already something on that pole that co-location of a small wireless facility would hurt or otherwise be detrimental. They also imposed a shot clock. So we only have a short period of time from the time a carrier submits a permit to the time that we approve it or deny it. Otherwise, it's automatically deemed approved. So if we don't meet the terms of the shot clock, then the permit is just automatically approved according to state law and FCC regulations. Municipalities have responded to this legislation and these regulations in several different ways. Some of them have spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to adapt and live in this legal and regulatory environment. That's the approach we've taken. That's what led to the small wireless facility ordinance that we passed last year. Some municipalities have chosen to just ignore it. And others have been hanging their hat on legal challenges. In other words, there's a lot of we do have some gray area, which gives us a little wiggle room. However, other municipalities have abused that. So, I'm hearing whispers within the FCC that depending on how the presidential election turns out, they may be, and based on some challenges that have been filed with the FCC, we may end up losing a bunch of that wiggle room, particularly in the area of areas zoned primarily as residential. But here's the thing, we want to be a 5G city. We want to be a premier 5G market, which requires the deployment of these small wireless facilities. Now, why is that? Because 5G promises and provides a mechanism for the carriers to provide services that they're not currently providing. For instance, wireless cable service to the home, internet, becoming an internet service provider using 5G. So what that adds to is the ability for the carriers to deliver more services using 5G wireless technology, which brings more competition to the St. Louis market. So instead of just relying on the wireline providers like Spectrum, now you have access to market offerings from Verizon, new offerings from AT&T and T-Mobile. So, there is some gray area, as I said previously, about what we can and can't do legally. But then the question also becomes, just because we can legally do it, is it in the best interests of the residents and businesses in the city of St. Louis? I advocate that, we need to do whatever we can to make sure that, we become a 5G market. And the other thing about it is, and this gets to our market standing, with help from the board and numerous city departments and in consultation with the wireless carriers, we came up with a pretty smooth process. Granted, there's growing pains. I'll let somebody else speak to that. But we've provided a relatively easy way in for carriers, which has drastically improved our market standing. We used to be pretty low on the totem pole as far as the deployment of new technology, but because of the steps we've taken over the last year, we are quickly becoming one of the top priority markets. So, it'd be nice for St. Louis to be on the top of the list. And then the other thing we have to consider is the way carriers invest in deploying new technology. They're concerned about deploying a network in total. So we wouldn't want to do anything which turns their network into Swiss cheese. So they have, holes in residential areas and things like that, because that denies residents in that area access to, 5G services, but it also weakens the return on investment and, the economic impact of deploying in a market. So if they can't deploy their entire network without holes in it all over the place, they're less apt to deploy, and they're going to move to a market where they can fully deploy without holes in the network. So that's where we're at as far as how we got here, why we want to be a 5G market, and where we currently stand in the pecking order of carrier deployments. And that's all I have.
Okay,
For now.
thank you, Robert. So why don't we do this? Let's get through the city presenters. Who else is going to speak on behalf of the city? Then we'll do some questions, and we'll let Verizon present. So who's next on your end, Robert?
Rich Bradley.
Okay, welcome back, Rich.
Yeah, okay, so from the BPS perspective, as you're all aware, BPS handles all the permitting and uses within the public right of way. And so about 3 years ago, when this thing reared up, we realized that it was going to be so much, so fast, there would be no way that the staff here could handle it. So a lot of us worked very tirelessly on hiring a consultant to help us manage the process so that we could meet all the milestones that these laws have put into place that Robert talked about, particularly the shot clocks, where if you don't respond, they're automatically approved. And we absolutely did not want that. So we hired XG as our consultant to assist us with the process. They established an online reservation system whereby the carriers can reserve city assets to install the 5G, which are predominantly city streetlights. After that, the carriers complete an application for a BPS permit, just like any other permit in the right of way. The applications are then referred to the street department and public utilities for their review and comments. Once those applications are reviewed, then they're actually sent to the BPS board for approval. It's also important to understand that after BPS approves these permits, that there are still permits required by the street department, which Jamie can talk about next. Some actions that BPS took in this process that I think everybody needs to know. I'm going to highlight a couple of things here. So in August of 2019, the Board of Public Service approved the uniform streetlight specification. Why is that important? It's important because, you know, these carriers would have came in with an application approved and hung all this stuff everywhere, and it would have looked like garbage. And we could not have stopped that. There are actually a few installations of that around the city, and I really don't want to point those out, but we got in front of the 8 ball and we established a streetlight spec that met all their criteria. It looks somewhat reasonable. We think it all looks pretty reasonable. Again, I know there's questions about that, but it was to control the appearance of what they were putting up. The next milestone was in April of 2020, the Board of Public Service approved a moratorium for Zone A, historical districts, and farm-based code zone districts for the submittal of new applications from the carriers due to the pandemic and the stay-at-home order. We wanted to make absolutely certain that, you know, nothing was getting jammed through without us giving it a thorough review. And that moratorium is set to expire in mid-November, on the 19th of November of this year. And then in July of 2020, BPS, in response to a number of complaints, also issued a resolution to protect the urban canopy. And so the idea of that is when these fiber works or poles were getting put in, a lot of the tree lawn area was getting tore up, trees were getting damaged. We heard that loud and clear. And so this resolution requires the carriers to do the lion's share of their work in between the curbed area of the right of way out in the pavement, other than obviously putting up the pole and maybe a handhole to connect that. All their utility feeds and fiber feeds would have to run in the paved area. And then lastly, I just want to make the comment before I stop talking that Verizon by far has the most permits approved over any other carriers. AT&T may have a couple, but Verizon has by far the most. And so, yes, there were some problems and there still are some problems which we're working through. But I will say that from my perspective, we talk to them at least on a weekly basis, if not more than once a week. And they have tried very hard to work with us above and beyond what the actual rules and regulations say they have to do. And so, you know, I feel like they really want to try to do the right thing. But again, you know what? There's growing pains and mistakes are made, and they have responded to that. And I think, again, Jamie can talk a little more to that in his conversation. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jamie.
Thanks, Rich.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jamie.
For sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Following the BPS right-of-way permit process and approval that Rich described, as he said, then they are required to get more permits before construction begins. So the carriers get their BPS permit, and then they turn over their contractors, and then the contractors come over to streets to pull their street excavation permits. That excavation permit covers their physical work in the right-of-way, which in these cases would involve some of the conduit runs for, these are new power runs to these new poles, as well as fiber communication conduit runs to these new poles, plus the actual new pole installation. Albeit these new poles are in the site of the existing street lights, but there are new poles as Rich described, so they look different. Relative to those small cells, as Rich alluded to, there are so many of these coming in. Verizon by far has a lion's share, so we're seeing a lot of new poles and new conduit work. So we're in a lot more obviously work in right of way than we typically do. And we also, with that additional work, we've got some new contractors in town as well, and an increased potential with that additional work for more conflicts with our existing underground infrastructure, which is always a concern. So with the new contractors, we got some growing pains, as Robert mentioned, one of which is kind of involving outreach to some of the residents when we know the work's coming in, getting that advance work saying, hey, we're going to be here in this week of this month type thing, as well as the actual contractor pulling up, parking outside, and doing some digging for like a handhold, like Rich referenced, that maybe in some of that tree lawn areas. So let them know, knock on the door, say, hey, I'm going to be here for the next couple of days. This is what we're doing. We're not digging up your front yard. We're going to be off to the side here, but just keeping that relationship with the residents is important, because if you leave anything to question, I think a lot of us know a lot of times things are the worst case scenarios envisioned by a resident that may happen, and there may be a lot to do about nothing. So it's good to have that communication. So the carriers have been very receptive to that and passing it on to internally, as well as get that advance notice out, as well as passing it on to their contractors for that day-to-day contact at the residents' houses. With the potential for those underground conflicts, that's something we as the city departments and inspection services need to sit on the contractors more, and they also need to comply by their state laws as far as these directional boring, especially when it comes to the utilities that cross over across them, whether it's water lines or sewers or whatever our utilities are, to make sure we're not tearing existing stuff up as we're putting the new stuff in. So there have been, like Rich said, we're going to screw up. There's some growing pains. We've had, half a dozen water lines busted as this stuff's going in. Putting in perspective, there's miles and miles and miles of conduit being put in, and we've had about 6 conflicts here within the last month or two here. The carriers and the contractors have been very responsive to getting back on that and cooperating with the city department and getting that service back on. But again, it is something we, as the inspection, the enforcement side of it, sit on these guys extra hard, and they are also more aware of the need to expose some of those utilities and take the precautions that are necessary to make sure we don't have any conflicts like that. The last thing we want to do while trying to provide these new 5G service is to screw up an existing service they have. We want to add to it, not take one away and add one. So we've had, like Rich said, we've had cooperation from these guys, and we expect and look forward to their future cooperation as we keep doing this. We're not past anything. We haven't perfected anything. They're learning, we're learning, and we got to keep doing that. So it's not in the rearview mirror, but it's something we all have to concentrate on as these new poles come in. So we've said Verizon's one carrier now. We're going to have other carriers coming in, and we're going to have to repeat that process with them. And I assume things are going to get broke like they got broke on this. But same thing, we're going to be smarter after this, and we're going to continue to get smarter. So we want to make sure we protect the residents and basically their quality of life provided by those utilities. So that's our concern, and we're making sure the contractors and the carriers sharing that concern.
Great. Thanks,
Thank-
Jamie. Do we have anyone else from the city, or can I open it up for questions? Okay. And we're going to open up for questions for our city folks on this process. Alderman Vollmer.
Thank you. Pardon me, Mr. Chairman. So is there a competition for locations? Is that what's occurring here? When you say we have multiple carriers going in, are there designated sites where this can go? Or are there, as far as locations, will you see Verizon Tower here, AT&T Tower down the street, or can anyone answer that?
So
Well, go ahead.
my comment will be that, the online reservation system upfront, Alderman, we identified all the assets in the city, like I said, predominantly streetlights. Some of those are reserved for other things, no traffic signals, things like that. And so all the locations on that reservation system are on a first come, first served basis. And so, they get online, they pick a location, they say, in reference to what they need for service, what are the available, infrastructure items that we have, and they can pick. So in essence, yes, there could be a couple of 3 carriers on one block. It just depends on which of those were available in the online system.
All right. Thank you very much, sir. Go ahead.
I'll add one thing onto that. So there will be multiple carriers in a block, for example, as Rich just said, but also the pole will be exactly the same. So there won't be a Verizon pole that looks one way. There won't be an AT&T pole that looks another way. It's all this city standard that was referenced earlier in our conversation, where a lot of work did go into making sure these poles, they do look different than our existing city streetlight poles.
Yeah, the one old lady thought that we were installing missiles when she saw the new ones.
Yeah, you could draw that comparison. Yeah. But so they look bigger than or wider than our existing streetlights. That's because in order to prevent the carriers from hanging all their stuff, like a Christmas tree on our existing poles and looking just gaudy, these poles were specifically designed with the volume to be able to enclose all that equipment. So it's not hung on the outside. So it is wider, but it's for a reason to hide all the junk, basically, the smart junk for their technology. So it wasn't hung on the outside. So I just want to make sure that folks understand that. And again, these will not be different poles per carrier. It'll be the same pole. You won't be able to tell which carrier owns that pole.
All right. Thank you very much. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderwoman Ingracia.
No questions. Thank you.
All right. Alderman Navarro.
Morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes.
Alderwoman, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I do have, nobody ever makes the mistake in the opposite direction. Has anyone ever called you Mr. Chairwoman? My guess isn't. I'm fine with either one. So I do have some questions that, I'll put them out there and we'll see, whichever one of you can answer them. So one, in terms of these poles, can the utility, from the city's perspective, can the utility providers share a pole? Are they, we're not telling them, we're not saying they have to have their own pole. Is that right?
They cannot share poles because of the spectrum that each carrier, because of the frequency range that's assigned to each carrier, they cannot put, AT&T and Verizon cannot deploy a small wireless facility on the same pole because they will interfere with each other. So they have to, each of them have to deploy on separate poles, and there's a minimum amount of distance away from each other that they have to be. So unfortunately, just because of the way the technology works, they cannot share poles.
And do you think that will always be the case? Obviously cell tower, and I know there's a difference between cell towers and utility poles, but you can get multiple providers on towers. So is this something that we just, once there's more technology, they'll be able to share poles?
That would be Don't know. Depends on what new technology emerges. Based on the current 5G technology, they cannot share poles. And that's because of, these are small wireless facilities, the height that they're at, unlike larger cell towers that you're used to, that, 4G or 3G was primarily deployed on. They could share a tower, but they still had to be, there was still some minimum separation on those towers. But the way 5G works and the way small wireless facilities work, like I said, as of right now, they cannot share. Now, 4 years from now, 5 years from now, with whatever new technology emerges, maybe, but it's impossible to say at this point.
Okay, and in terms of the location of these, from the city's perspective, is there any reason why they couldn't go in the alley?
A lot of that has to do, again, with how the technology works. Putting them in alleys can be somewhat problematic because you have a lot of electrical infrastructure back in alleys that can interfere with small wireless facilities. The optimum place to go, based on the distance you can get off a small wireless facility, is on streetlight poles. Additionally, there tends to be too many things in alleys that interfere with the signal and signal quality that the small cells require.
Okay, because I mean, as you know, for city residents who are starting to see these pop up, especially in front of their homes, which I think is particularly problematic because real estate can be pretty small, and some of our, if it's a single family home, you don't always have a big front yard, you don't have a big tree lawn, and so when these go up in front of your home, it's very noticeable. And our alleys are obviously designed for putting all of that infrastructure in. So obviously, I'm getting a lot of questions about, we have alleys, they're for this reason, and yeah. I understand they can go in the front, and I was just curious if there's nothing on our end that we're saying they couldn't go in the alley. It's
absolutely. We're not saying that they can't go in the alley. The issue is there's other infrastructure in our alleys that interfere with these small wireless facilities, and potentially vice versa.
So as the alleys get more crowded, more and more of this infrastructure is probably going to be showing up in front of people's. I mean, that's the fear, is that the right of way that's protected in front of people's homes is now going to. Anyway, that's more of commentary that it's unfortunate that we have this great system of alleys, and as it gets more crowded, utility providers are choosing now to jump up and use the fronts of our homes. In terms of the poles themselves, who can you please just describe who all was consulted in the selection of those? We have a lot of historic districts in our city, and I'm curious,
yes,
resources was consulted, who was involved in those conversations?
So we engaged a private entity to come up with the initial design of our poles. We also went with some assistance from XG. We also consulted the wireless carriers and other infrastructure providers, people who, deploy this stuff on behalf of the carriers, like Extenet, Black & Veatch. And then once we had the initial pole spec, because we were trying to solve several different problems. One, we have problems deploying our own technology on our current streetlight poles because they're concrete, they have a very small core, you can't drill into them. So one of the things we were trying to build into the specs was an ability for us to deploy our own technology. And then we also had the space requirements that we have to give the carriers. So once we came up with this initial spec in consultation with the carriers, the people who deploy these things, our own consultants, then we went through a rather extensive review where forestry was consulted, streets, the Board of Public Service, the Communications Commissioner, the city operations director, and we put these specs through a lot of scrutiny. And they went through several revisions. Everything that's part of the pole has a very specific purpose, like the equipment cabinets at the base, hiding their antennas at the top. So, a lot of city departments were engaged, the carriers were engaged, external consultants were engaged to ultimately get to where we are now. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I think that sounds, all of those folks needed to be consulted. I think what is missing is that, especially in these historic districts, we dictate to people what kind of windows they can have, what kind of front porches they can have. People are getting cited and they have to invest a lot of their own money to get their homes up to certain codes in order to comply in these historic districts. But it doesn't seem like there was anybody consulted in terms of the aesthetics or the of these poles and how they would work, or conform in any sort of way in these historic districts. And so for obvious reasons, a lot of people are wondering why this is being plopped in front of their home, yet there are all sorts of restrictions on them personally. So I guess I'm surprised that you didn't mention cultural resources.
Actually, that was an oversight on my part. We did consult with building division and, cultural resources. They were a part of the conversation, both because we had to deal with what these poles would look like in the right of way. And we also had to deal with how we were going to handle zoning for poles for small wireless facilities that could potentially be deployed on private property. So we did consult them. It was my oversight not including them in the initial list that I gave you.
Okay, it's my understanding though that these poles don't necessarily conform with any of the historic district standards. I haven't looked at all of them, but in terms of color, I think what's hard is, especially for a lot of us who deal with constituents on a day-to-day basis, it was just announced that this is, once they're up, this is what's going up. And, the aesthetics of this and knowing what else is out there. And so I guess one question I have is there, technology is probably going to change. And I imagine we're going to start seeing, there's going to be multiples of these on a block. And I don't know if the plan is eventually all of our street pole, Cobra light poles are going to be replaced at some point. And if we think there's going to be another design in the future, because there's more and more technology coming out. We also know more and more neighborhoods want pedestrian lighting. The Cobra lightings are not for pedestrian lighting. And so there's a great need in our neighborhoods, especially with our beautiful tree canopy, to have more pedestrian lighting. And so it seems like there's a bigger conversation that's needed. And I don't know if that's in the works at some point in terms of what our lighting is going to look like. I know I've just worked with neighborhoods and getting their pedestrian lights, and there's so many things to consider, and there's a lot of opinions obviously to manage. But now here we are possibly replacing the Cobras in the city with this pole that, most of us had no idea about or input on. So I'm curious, what are you all thinking in the long term in terms of new technology coming on? And are we going to eventually replace all of our Cobras with these?
We designed, as the poles were designed, we designed them to try and future-proof them as well. So for example, there's extra conduit space inside the pole. There's extra space for deploying additional equipment. So as technology changes, the intent was to come up with a pole design that could support that in future. The other part of that is, we have new lighting, which allows us to provide, and carriers have to deploy this new lighting on each pole that they replace, which allows us to provide street lighting and pedestrian lighting off the same light. Additionally, the poles are modular, so there's pre-attachment positions on the poles that allow you to, attach an arm that extends over the sidewalk for additional pedestrian lighting, or allows us to attach any other kind of technology without having to strap it onto the pole. So there were a lot of constraints that we're under, but then
Hello. Can you hear just
Go ahead, Robert.
So there were a lot of constraints that we were under, but then we also wanted to solve multiple problems with the same pole design. And again, we have to let the carriers deploy these things. And as Rich said, we wanted to get ahead of that. So we wouldn't have AT&T deploying one kind of pole that none of us had any input into, and Verizon deploying a different type of pole that none of us had any input into. So this was our way to respond to the legislation and the regulations, enhance our ability to deploy existing and new technology using a new pole, and then also use this for advancing the lighting that we're deploying to get better street lighting and better pedestrian lighting, while also reducing the amount of attachments and things like that we have to put on the poles in order to do that.
Okay, thank you. That's good to know. In terms of the pedestrian lighting, how will those be activated? Will neighbors, when will that be activated, and what's the process for getting those additional attachments?
Right now, the new lights are being piloted downtown. We're also having the carriers install the new lights as they replace poles elsewhere in the city. But the key to it is the technology in the light head. Through the use of LED panels that are positioned differently, you can get off one light, you can get street light and pedestrian lighting, which is sort of aimed backwards towards the street. That's on. And these are also smart lights, so they can be controlled remotely. So turning on or off the pedestrian lighting, setting the brightness of the lights is all controlled remotely.
So are we putting the pedestrian lighting on now, or when can we expect to see the pedestrian lighting added?
Right now, you can see the pedestrian lighting on downtown as part of the downtown smart street light pilot. When the new lights go up, and I'll let Jamie, make sure Jamie keeps me honest on this. When the lights are turned on, the pedestrian lighting is also turned on. So it's not, we only turn on this or the other. When the new light head goes up, both the pedestrian lighting and the street lighting off that one light head is on. All we do is adjust the brightness because these things can get really, really bright.
So all of
So
this. So I guess I'm just trying to understand. So like there are several in the 28th ward that have gone up the poles. So you're telling me they have pedestrian lighting on them, and it's turned on at the same time as the top light comes on?
I'll let, right now, I don't think they are. So while they're capable of it, I'm not sure the ones outside of downtown, the pedestrian lighting is active from the start.
Because that would just be really helpful to know, because especially, in neighborhoods that aren't thrilled about the look of these poles, being able to say, hey, look, you're going to get pedestrian lighting out of it is definitely a plus. But I don't know that I don't want to tell people there's pedestrian light coming if there's not. So it would be great at some point to get some information on when the pedestrian light is being activated, I guess, or how that works. I don't know if there's anybody else who can describe a little bit more about it.
Yeah, Alderwoman, this is Jamie. These lights, as Robert said, are being future-proofed, as he said, for these options for PED lighting. But we, at this point, with the number of these lights going in, we're not really firing up that PED portion because our 99% of our streetlights around us don't have it. So we're going to create one flashlight in the middle of a sidewalk area and then not provide that same service up and down the street. So it's not something we decided we're doing as far as right now our streets with our streetlights, and we haven't gotten to the point of lighting sidewalks. But while these new installations are going in, we are future-proofing those, so we don't have to go back and put something different on there as we work in the future and figure out what we're going to do with our streetlights, because we've got 55,000 of these streetlights in the city, and if we end up with 1,000 small cell lights that do everything under the sun, it's going to be difficult to say we can do that with the other 98% of our structure. So it's something we got to think about it, but it's something that not you're going to see
Amy?
something like fire up.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if anybody else is having issues. I can barely, there's a lot of feedback.
Yeah, Jamie, it sounds like you're cutting in and out a little bit, man. I don't know if you're in where you are, but if you can get somewhere quiet.
I mean, I think I got all of that. I don't think we should be telling people that these, at least in neighborhoods, then that these poles are coming with pedestrian lighting. It sounds like these are options for the future, but it's really only going to work once the Cobras are all, once we have more consistency and we have more of these poles, then we could start looking at pedestrian lighting. So it's a little bit different than, because I don't want to be out there telling my neighbors like, oh, hey, I know you're not thrilled about this pole, but it's got pedestrian lighting on it, because that's not going to happen until more poles are replaced and it's some future date. Pedestrian lighting is not it's a future thing. It's not something that people can expect as these poles are being installed.
Yeah,
The other
this is
thing to
Jamie. I'm
stress-
sorry, I moved outside, but you're exactly right, Alderwoman, and I would go with the latter of what you just said there, that it's something we're not going to be selling that we're doing now, but it is something internally that we're looking at in the future, but I wouldn't be saying that now. So it's basically what I said for future proofing the new installation, so we don't have to go back and do something later, and I'll have to come up with a plan or determine what we're going to do in the future.
Okay. Because the next thing I wanted to talk about, a few people have referenced the growing pains and the water mains that have been cut and the tree lawns. And so I have two pieces on this. One is the notice to neighbors, which I'll get to. But the second one, I'm curious, when that sort of thing happens, are there any fines? What's the enforcement when we've got, we've got contractors out there that are doing damage, either on private property, people losing their water. There's a lot of, it sounds like there's a lot of this work going on. We've already had a lot of growing pains. What's the enforcement here to make sure that this work is being done well?
That's where those old water lines are busted. They work with city water and get that service back up and running. That's what the contractor's cost. And us from the permitting side, we can also assess fines for violations as part of their excavation permit conditions. Specifically to those ones that occurred in this last month here. I don't have the information in front of me as far as actually financially what that amounted to, but that's something I can find out.
Okay, because I think that's going to be important. I mean, we are essentially being forced to give up our right of way to these private utility providers. And if they're going to cause damage that affects our residents, I think that we should be, I think they should be paying fines for that. So I guess then the other piece of that is, the notice to residents in terms of when things are getting torn up. And it is a little shocking to residents when they find out that this is going up, and especially if they live in a historic district and they find out, oh, this is going up, or they don't even find out. They find out because they see it happening. So what sort of notice is the city doing? What sort of notice is required of the utility providers? And I know there's multiple pieces of this. There's the actual pole, which is going to go in front of one place, but then the fiber has to be installed. And so that means there's digging in multiple places up and down the street, not just where the pole is going. So, I mean, I've got lots of neighbors calling me. There's white markings all over the street. We have no idea what's going on. Who is responsible? Who's required to tell whom, what, when?
I know, and Mr. Chairman and Alderwoman, that may be some portion. I know Verizon's on the call. They may speak towards some of that public engagement, both the advance notice and the contractor stuff. I do want to re-emphasize as we talk about these conflicts, and I said we're getting better about the enforcement side and better on making sure these contractors are compliant with what we're doing. We're drilling on their drilling with the directional drilling and boring that we're talking about. We will be requiring these contractors, these carriers, to expose some of those underground facilities, not with a backhoe, but with non-invasive ways to expose some of those critical things like a water line to a house. So when they come through with the conduit run perpendicular to that, they're not busting through it. We hope to have, that's what we're going to do to limit the potential for these conflicts, more so than in the past. And that's something, it's a new emphasis for us, and it's like come to light until the order of magnitude of all these boring jobs came through that kind of necessitated this level of attention to it. So I just want to make sure that's understood, that it is something that we're changing and something that we're going to set on tight on making sure there's compliance. But again, the public engagement side, I think Verizon may be able to describe that in a little more detail.
Well, is there anything that the city does, even whether it's notifying all their persons that this work is going to be done in their ward? Is there anything that the city requires or that we would do, or is that on the provider? Whoever gets the permit, it's generally them who give the notice. It's a lot for people to wake up in the morning and find that their street's being dug up, or especially if they're going to be having work done, they have things scheduled, and now, that can't happen. So what do we have a process for getting the word out, or does the city require anything? So apart from what the providers would do, does the city require any sort of notice? I'm hearing no. I guess that's what I'm just checking.
Alderwoman Navarro, this is Donna with the communications. So on the permits, when the permits are issued to the contractor, the carrier, there is a notice that goes with that says that they are responsible for any notices that need to be provided to the alderpersons as well as to the residents that are going to be impacted. So the requirement is there, but the requirement for or the responsibility is on the carrier or their contractor.
Okay, great.
And Alderwoman, the reason for that is this gets back to state law and regulations. It frustrates the city's ability to provide public notice because according to the laws and regulations, they have 1 year to start construction once the permit is approved. After they pull the permits after they get the permit from BPS and Streets Department, we don't necessarily know when that's actually going to begin, which is why we put the requirement on the carriers to provide that notice. Because we're forbidden from issuing a permit, but saying, okay, you have to execute your construction in January of 2021. So because we can't do that, it makes it very difficult for us on the city side to provide those public notifications. Again, that's why we put the requirement in the permit that the carriers provide that community outreach and notifications.
Yeah, I understand that. I wonder, could we even just put up, on the website? When these, XG is working on this, I know there are a lot of permits, but is it possible that we could have a website where people could go and just see that, okay, permits have been approved in these areas, and construction could start at any point in a year since that permit's been issued, but at least people in the city could go and see where is this infrastructure planned. And that could be helpful in a lot of ways. I could also see somebody who wants to be in an area that has a lot of 5G access could say, oh, look, this is where I'm going to plan to go or start a business or something theoretically. I think it could be helpful. And also anybody who's getting ready to, who's curious about why their street might be getting torn up or something, if they could just be able to go and see the city has issued permits. It doesn't mean that work is going to start anytime soon, but at least there's some sort of heads up that permits have been issued in these areas, or even, I don't know if we can even put applications up. They've been applied for and here's where they've been issued. Is that sort of status update? That's something we could do?
I will certainly take that on board. I will look into several options and I will circle back with this committee. I'll give myself an arbitrary deadline of within a month. As far as systems that we might be able to expose to the public or other things that we might be able to do as part of this outreach.
Well,
So
I think
thank you for the suggestion. I will take it on board and talk internally with some of the other departments and get back with you as far as options.
And I think that could be really helpful. I know something you and I have talked about before, Robert, is equitable access to this new technology. And I think that, if we were able to map that out, I think that might really help make the case for what areas of the city need more access to 5G. If we can start seeing where, if all the permits are clustered in one area, we can see what other areas, are really where the disparity is in the city.
I concur, but we do need to have a larger conversation about that, because what the carriers are doing right now is shoring up their existing service. So they're plugging holes in their existing service. They're adding capacity because as more and more people are using wireless services, the network's getting jammed. So we would need to be careful about the optics, because even though it may look like all of this stuff is going in a few areas, that's because of what's happening now. And then it's my understanding they're going to be coming back through and then, furthering their deployment throughout the city. So yeah, I'll take your suggestion on board, but I think there also needs to be a dialogue about how if we were going to do something like this, how we message that and how we contextualize it. To prevent the perception that, this is something that's only going downtown and in the central business corridor. So yeah, let me engage some folks on my side, think about it, and then I will circle back with the committee with potential options, but we will have to have a conversation about how whatever we would do, how we would message that and contextualize that.
Great,
Does
thank
that
you.
make sense?
Yes, yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you. My last question is, in terms of, if there are any residents who have any health concerns related to having a 5G pole in front of their residence, is there anything that they can do about that?
I know that there are a lot of concerns out there about health risks associated with 5G and the radiation that these small wireless facilities put out. That's kind of really the only way to address that is through messaging, because the fact of the matter is all the equipment that's being deployed is FCC approved. So the health risks that a lot of people are concerned about, to the extent that the FCC has been able to look into that, I mean, really, there's evidence on both sides, but at the end of the day, we have to fall back on the FCC rules and the legislation, and we're hanging our hat on the fact that, okay, FCC, you've approved these devices. We know safety is one of the things that you look at, but concerns over the impact that this can have on people's health is something that, we can only really address through messaging.
Okay, so it's accurate to say that we're relying on the FCC's guidance and decisions, and in terms of health risks.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And so if anybody has any issues with, well, whether it's health or, maybe there's some other reason they wouldn't want a pole, in front of their home or their business. Maybe it has something to do with, it's right next to a beautiful tree. I don't know what it would be, or they have plans, it blocks potentially an entrance to their home, or there's an ADA ramp that's going to be hindered because of, or accessibility hindered in some sort of way. Is there any process for the property owner where these poles are going up to essentially appeal that decision? Sorry, that's my question. Sorry, I added one more.
I'm actually going to punt that one to Rich Bradley, since he oversees the permitting process. What I can say is one of the things that each deployment is, and I'll tackle accessibility head on. You know, one of the checks and balances that goes into the permitting process is just like anything else that goes in the right of way. It has to conform with our existing standards about what goes into the right of way, which includes, you know, you can't render the sidewalk or anything near a building non-ADA compliant and things like that.
Okay, so I'll just add on to that a little bit. So Alderwoman, you know, you've been working with us on a number of these calls with Verizon. And, you know, I think in an ideal world, we want to have the poles put in the exact location where an existing pole was, obviously for lighting and, you know, aesthetics and everything else. However, through our conversations, we have moved poles around and shifted them slightly to accommodate just the things that you're talking about. So, you know, is there an actual formal process other than a conversation back with the carrier or through the alderman? At this point in time, I don't know of a formal process beyond that. But I think when those concerns come up, we've been particularly interested in working with each alderperson and residents to do whatever we can do, again, within the parameters of the law and the parameters of what's available to make those adjustments.
Okay, thank you. And I know that we've had a lot of conversations with Verizon, and they're the ones, you know, right now getting a lot of polls up. You know, I don't know what it's going to be like working with, you know, AT&T or T-Mobile. So it seems that, like, to the extent that we can get some consistency in terms of policies and procedures, that would, you know, benefit everybody moving forward.
Yeah, and as has been stated before, we're kind of on a leading edge here. So, you know, there's not even necessarily too many other municipalities that we can look to see what they've done, because every municipality is different. And thankfully, we're bumping up on the deployment priority list. So Verizon is deploying a lot now, but AT&T and T-Mobile aren't going to be far behind. So, you know, we do have an intention of, you know, as we learn things, improve our process, improve our reviews. So, yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this is a big learning curve. It has not been without some growing pain, but we're learning from that. And then the intention is to turn that around and codify that in processes, procedures, rules. So when AT&T starts to ramp up and T-Mobile starts to ramp up, we will have learned some lessons, and then, you know, take advantage of what we learned to get to that consistency.
Great, yeah, and I'm happy to help with that as much as possible. I do feel like a lot of my constituents are on the leading edge of that, which means that they're experiencing a lot of the growing pains. Thank you. I don't have any more questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alderwoman. Alderman Todd, or sorry, Alderman Narayan first, then Alderman Todd. Alderman Narayan.
Thank you, Chairman. I know that all of this is progress, and progress can be really frustrating. I think that Alderwoman Navarro asked most of the questions I was looking at asking. One that she did not cover, is there any way to have consistency on these? The ones that I've seen have, for the most part, been at intersections, at street corners. Is that by design, or is there any way to ensure that we're not seeing these pop up kind of in the middle of the block as well?
I would say, Alderman, it's all due to where they reserve them on the reservation system. It's all due to coverage. I think they will pop up in the middle of the blocks, but our conversations with Verizon, particularly on the onset here, have been, we want you to work on putting these on arterial and large streets first, because I think, as you guys know real well, people get used to things. When they first see it, it bothers them, and after they drive by it a few times, it sort of disappears. So the idea is to put them on the bigger streets first, let people, warm up to them a little bit before we start moving into the residential areas.
Totally understood. Thank you. I have nothing further, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Alderman. Alderman Todd?
Is it possible to do a study to see, an independent study to see what the health effect is on the residents for the 5G code?
There's no way for the city to do that. I mean, it would be extremely cost prohibitive, and we don't have the resources that would be available to do that. What I can tell you is there have been studies done by the carriers, the FCC, large academic institutions. And the result of those studies across the board has been there's nothing in those studies that concretely point to health risks associated with with these small wireless facilities. And I know as part of our communications, we can put links to studies that have been conducted. I believe I provided a few to Alderwoman Navarro. But unfortunately, given the legal and regulatory environment that we're in, we're limited, and we have to hang our hat on what the FCC has approved. Otherwise, we're out of compliance with FCC regulations and state law, which exposes the city to a lot of risk.
Thank you, Robert. Any other questions, Alderman Todd?
No, I don't have any, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to be very brief, and then we'll turn it over to some folks for Verizon. I think this has been very informative. And hopefully Verizon can speak to this a little bit, but I do think one of the things we probably need to be looking at doing a little better, and I get this is a new process and there's growing pains, and there is a delay from when a permit's issued to when a subcontractor is actually going to be in front of a property digging and stuff. But just some notice, whether it's flyering or posting some signs out front to give people a little advance notice. I know because I've had a few folks sort of say, what the heck's going on out here when crews show up and start digging. We're in most instances replacing one existing Cobra head with another one. It's a slightly different design, but it's still a light pole in the front yard. But I do think if we're going to be causing disruption of digging and everything, especially in an era when many of us are working from home and trying to do Zoom calls while people are boring in front of your house, that can be challenging. With that, and I don't know who's going to lead us off from Verizon, but I'd like to turn it over to Verizon, and I appreciate their patience. I know we've been going since 9 o'clock already, and I know they're sort of first in the market on this and sort of maybe bearing a brunt of some of these frustrations. So I'm going to turn it over to whoever from Verizon wants to kick off their presentation. And
Mr.
then we'll
Chairman,
yes.
Mr. Chairman, I have another meeting and I have a bill in that meeting I need
Go
to
ahead.
leave. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks,
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
And just a note, if we're going to make these people do notice, could we also contact Spires or have them before they start digging streets up, because they never notify anyone about anything?
That's a good point. Maybe that's part of a larger conversation for this committee and sort of improving some of these notice requirements. I would agree. All right, so let's turn it over to Verizon. I don't know who's going to kick us off. I'll go ahead and just unmute yourself and let us know who you are.
Thanks so much, Alderman Coder. This is Tanya Rosine. I'm the manager of state government affairs for Verizon. Just wanted to start off by saying, we greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak to this committee and provide additional information. We were really looking to work with the city hand in hand on this. We've been working with the city for, multiple years prior to this deployment and have been working in the city for, a significant period of time already building our network. So, again, appreciate this opportunity immensely to provide some additional information. Before I go any further, though, I just wanted to double check with you how much time we might have to present. At this point, knowing that we've gone on a little long, so I just want to be respectful of everyone's time so we can get through everything. But
I'll defer to you guys. Let's try to keep the presentation to 20 minutes or so that we can leave time for questions.
Okay. Yeah, that was our plan. So that's perfect. Thank you so much. So with our presentation, we'll be going through, exactly why we're expanding the wireless network and the benefits of 5G to the city and the investment we're making in St. Louis. We also will have the opportunity to go through some of the regulations that guide our build and the reviews that we go through for compliance and things like that. Talk a little bit more about outreach, which obviously we're hearing that is a concern and something that, you'd like to see be done better. And then also we have additional information about how we have been building, what we built already, what that looks like when we do that. And we have various experts from our team here to go through all of that information. So I will, they have a presentation available, which it looks like it's up now, which is great. Thank you so much. And I believe the first person to kick it off is Kyle Duker, who is our Director of Network Implementation.
Tanya, yes, thank you. Can everybody hear me?
I think I got your title wrong, Kyle, so I apologize.
No problem. Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you.
We can. Okay, good deal. Let's jump into slides. So first of all, let's jump into the deck, and I want to start by answering the simple question of why are we expanding our network? And the short answer is our customers, many of which live in St. Louis, are using the network more and more each day. And they demand a high-performing, high data rate network, and this demand continues to accelerate as new ideas and innovation are developed. Our phones today, they're not really used for voice anymore, not just voice alone anyway. Our customers expect to be fully connected all the time as they travel around and take care of their daily activities. So let me start by addressing a few numbers here on this slide. The first two numbers you see, these really indicate that the majority of Americans and business leaders do support the need for more small cells being deployed. 75% of home buyers and 83% of millennials, when they choose to buy a new home, they consider this a critical factor when they look to buy a home. Moving across the bottom row, 90% of households use wireless service in their house today, and 57% of those have cut the cord. They solely depend on wireless only. And last, and perhaps the most critical number on this slide, is that 80% of all 911 calls are made from a wireless device. Our phones really are a necessity for our customers and the technology we provide. Next slide, please. So let me talk a little bit about the evolution of our network. Several years ago, we typically served our customers with these macro sites. There's just a few that we had across the city, and they were these large footprints that covered large areas, and this worked well when it was a voice-only network and the data rates that were required were very low. Think of this as texting and so forth back in the 2G days. But over the last few years with video chat, FaceTime, and the demand for higher quality video, really the data rates have increased and our designs had to adjust to accommodate this. We were forced to take these larger macros and subdivide these into smaller areas so that we could keep up with the demand. These macros and these small cells, they're all hubbed together, connected together, and today this is how our network works. They coordinate the signals between our coverage layer, our macro layers, and really our small cells. They do provide additional coverage, but they're primarily capacity layers that provide the experience that our customers demand. And through this coordinated network, we're able to provide the best performance for our customers across the board, and that's the need for small cells. Next slide, please. So this slide lists a few examples of how our 5G ultra ultra wideband network with data rates speeds up to 4 gigabits can be used to spur innovation. Earlier, I mentioned the need that video was the migration to video, and this has put higher demands on our network. And you see here, AR and VR listed, augmented reality and virtual reality. And signal streams of data is what we use today, but as we get into AR and VR, it's going to be multiple streams of data required to really give that augmented reality experience. You look here across the top row, remote medical diagnostic. You know, even with this day and age with COVID and so forth, there's a lot of remote activity happening where people are being diagnosed from afar. And I think as you get into, you know, being fully connected with a doctor, being able to help diagnose things remotely, or even being fully connected with an ambulance as patients are being transported through the hospitals. The more connected we are as we're migrating around the city, the safer we are as we get the information more readily available. Across the bottom row, you see surveillance, smart cities, intelligent lighting. Some of this was talked about earlier, but some of this could be as simple as, you know, an app to help identify where there's an open parking spot downtown and just help supplement our customers and enhance their daily activities as they're able to identify these concerns or these opportunities within their network and the daily activities. Next slide. In the earlier slides, I touched on in enhanced wireless service and how we're transitioning away from a voice-only network. You know, a solid, robust, reliable, and resilient network is required to serve our customers today. Our customers demand this today. We do believe there's an economic benefit for this here as well. Not just the additional work and contracts and so forth, but just imagine from an augmented reality perspective, you know, for someone to, you know, be on the arch grounds, again, from an augmented perspective, or immerse themselves into a game at center ice for the Blues game. Using this high rate connection to our customers with a little innovation can supplement and enhance our customers' experience these events today. My last talking point here on the slide is our capital investment. The fiber infrastructure and the small cells that we implement require significant investment. And Verizon has been and continues to be willing to commit to this investment. The St. Louis market is a critical market for Verizon, and we are committed to building this network for our customers in St. Louis. With that, I'll hand it to Danielle.
Thank you, Kyle. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I've been asked to spend just a few minutes discussing the evolution of our relationship with the city of St. Louis from a legal standpoint. And thank you for the slide there. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of background and then kind of bring us up to today. Verizon has had, as was mentioned here, a long history of working collaboratively with the city of St. Louis in connection with the deployment of our communications infrastructure. We started negotiations for a master agreement to begin our deployment activities back in 2017. Then in 2018, the state passed the small cell legislation, which eliminated the need for the master agreement that we had in place and established the permit-only process for small cells. The only thing that I would add to the great summary provided by Dr. Gaskell Clemens is that the Missouri small cell statute includes a provision which states that small cells are permitted use not subject to zoning review or approval, except that the placement in the right-of-way of new or modified utility poles in a single-family residential or area zoned as historic as of August of 2018 remain subject to any applicable zoning requirements that are not otherwise inconsistent with the Missouri statute. Following the adoption of the Missouri small cell statute, the FCC adopted its wireless infrastructure order in support of 5G deployment in the fall of 2018, and that order includes many of the same provisions that are included in the Missouri small cell statute. In that order, the FCC explained that a state or local requirement constitutes an effective prohibition of service if it materially limits or inhibits the provision of wireless telecommunication services, and this material inhibition standard applies in the context of aesthetic requirements. The FCC further explained that an effective prohibition occurs where a state or local legal requirement inhibits a provider from densifying a wireless network, introducing new services, or otherwise improving service capabilities. So just as it was explained earlier by Dr. Gaskell Clemens, the FCC in this order really paved the way for small wireless facilities to be deployed in cities and localities across the country. In December of 2018, the city adopted its small cell ordinance consistent with the Missouri statute. And the city's ordinance says that the city may require reasonable, technically feasible, non-discriminatory, and technologically neutral design or conceal requirements in an historic district. The ordinance cautions, however, that any such design or concealment measures shall not have the effect of prohibiting any provider's technology. The ordinance does not contain any additional zoning requirements for small cells in single-family zoned areas. Moreover, the ordinance is very clear that there are only limited conditions for which a small cell application may be denied, as was mentioned earlier. And if an application is denied, the ordinance specifically requires that the city shall document the complete basis for a denial in writing and send that documentation to the applicant on or before the day the city denies the application. If an applicant submits a revised application, the ordinance requires the city to approve or deny the revised application within 30 days. We look forward to receiving the complete basis for denial of some of our permits so that we can cure those concerns and resubmit those applications for further consideration. Although the city has not yet adopted any zoning requirements for single family and historic zoned areas, we understand that the city may choose to do so, and we're supportive of reasonable and technically feasible principles for small cell deployments that would address the city's concerns in these areas and be achievable in the context of our build. At the city's request, we recently had a brainstorming sessions with city representatives to collaborate on some siting principles, and we made the following suggestions. First, in the area of aesthetics, we committed to utilizing the pole design that Verizon finalized with Dr. Gaskell Clemens last year and has been discussed here. Second, in terms of siting locations, we committed to using co-location on existing poles and replacing those existing poles where they stand, as opposed to installing brand new poles. We recommended avoiding main lines of sight in front of doors and windows, placing poles on common property lines between houses as opposed to right in front of houses, using sides of houses rather than the front when technically feasible, or using areas across the street in open areas or medians or parks, things like that when feasible. So those were all the suggestions around siting locations. Third, as it relates to communication and notification specifically, as mentioned earlier, the city's excavation instructions require a 1-week advance notice of construction to the residents and older persons in residential areas, as well as a notice to the communications division 24 hours prior to excavation. We are committed to ensuring that our contractors comply with those requirements on a going forward basis. And fourth, as it relates to quality construction practices, we have committed to ensuring that our vendors clean construction debris from sites, avoid leaving unsafe and exposed equipment, and avoid damage to streetscapes, monuments, and landscaping. But when accidents happen, because they will sometimes, we are absolutely committed to being responsive to concerns raised, repairing all of the damage that we have caused, and leaving sites in the same or better condition than when we found them. We would certainly like to continue working with the city in developing reasonable principles around construction in residential and historic areas. If we could go to the next slide, please. Finally, I just wanted to point out that wireless service providers are subject to additional regulatory compliance requirements, including federal requirements established in the National Environmental Policy Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, and various radio frequency emissions requirements. All of those requirements require additional obligations that we comply with under State Historic Preservation Office, the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, and many other regulatory agencies as shown on this slide. We conduct an internal compliance review for every one of our proposed sites in parallel with the city's application review process, and we only apply for excavation permits after we have obtained the necessary regulatory approvals associated with all of these agencies. We thought it important to provide this additional level of detail to ensure this board and this committee that every site is put through a rigorous vetting and legal and regulatory review before the first shovel is put in the ground to start construction on the site. It is important to Verizon to do things right in accordance with the laws, in collaboration with city leaders, and with respect shown to all impacted stakeholders and property owners. With that context, I'd like to yield the rest of the time to Steve to share more details about our St. Louis build.
Thanks, Danielle. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so Tanya, I don't know if you want to go ahead and jump in and touch on this slide.
Sure. Sorry about that. Was trying to get off mute. So this slide just demonstrates some of the additional outreach beyond the permitted outreach requirements that we have with the city of St. Louis. So for each of the cities that we build in, we like to develop an informational website where both constituents, residents, business owners, whoever has questions about what's going on and what we're doing in their community has a one-stop shop for all of that information. So I've taken a screenshot of the header of the website to see what's there, but feel free to please refer to anyone who reaches out to you with questions or anything else like that, and send them to this website. In this website also there is a place where residents can submit inquiries, or anyone else for that matter, and those go to our team. We review those and respond to those. We keep track of all of those and make sure they're responded to in a timely manner. I know I've talked to some of you already and sent some information out. We try to do as much outreach as possible. We have lots of educational materials available. I know some questions came up with regards to RF safety and things like that. And, I'm happy to continue to provide some additional documentation with regards to that, and any other questions about 5G, small cells and the like. But a lot of that information is contained in the website that's referenced here on this slide. And then on top of that, we also have, before we started deploying or expanding our network in St. Louis, the network team started reaching out to various HOAs to provide them with information that we were doing that and offer the opportunity to provide a presentation or an informational session with more information. They could, give them the opportunity to ask clarifying questions or just seek more information. And we're committed to continuing to, work with the city on this, work with the aldermen and women here in St. Louis and the residents to make sure folks are informed and understand what's going on, and making sure that any, that concerns are addressed and resolved, and making sure we have clear communication. We want to be a partner with the city on this. And so with that being said, these are some of our efforts that we have made to try to make that happen. Steve?
Yeah. So my name's Steve LeVar. I handle the engineering group who handles the real estate process, which is really the permitting process. And then we also are responsible for the pole construction and the power utility connections. My counterpart Blair is on the call as well, and he handles the fiber construction, and it follows a similar processes. We're not diving into the fiber construction today, but if there are questions, we certainly are happy to address those as well. This is the process that Rich Bradley talked through from a site development perspective. And so this is the permitting process. After we reserve the poles, we follow this process going through the various, going through XG as the third party that the city has hired to handle some of the processing here. And we work with them through these reviews and then all the way through BPS approval on our permits. And then we move into the excavation and construction permits that we discussed earlier as well. So this is really just a kind of an overview of all of the different departments and opportunities for other groups to weigh in on the sites that we're selecting for the deployment throughout St. Louis. As far as pole design, once we get that permit and we move forward, as it was mentioned earlier, we are almost exclusively deploying on replacement light poles. These were developed in partnership with the city, and we are leveraging and only at this time deploying the poles sourced through Labyrinth, the local manufacturer of these. I will say, just to Alderwoman Navarro's question earlier, as far as the co-location of multiple carriers on these poles, my view of it is it really is difficult to put multiple carriers on a single pole due to the size of the equipment. Small cells don't necessarily look like small cells when you start to stack antennas and radios. The base would have to be expanded. The antenna structure at the top would have to be much, much larger to accommodate multiple arrays of antennas. So that's really the difficulty I see in deploying these as co-located facilities. And I think it would be problematic to be able to put 2 or 3 carriers in these poles. So anyways, just to comment on that. Additionally, the comments on as far as the design, we're more than willing to work with the city on this design and how that applies into, historical areas. We are more than willing, simple things as far as paint color and other things like that. Those are easy things for us to accommodate if the color of the poles needs to be adjusted based on the neighborhood that they're in. And those are certainly things that we've worked with other cities as we've deployed to accommodate different, unique features of different neighborhoods and districts in the cities. And we're more than willing to do that with St. Louis as well. I'm sharing here just some examples of where, these are actual deployments in the city of St. Louis that we've deployed. And so this is just meant to show some of that infrastructure deployment. I think in general, these have gone fairly well and have had limited disruption to the citizens in these areas. Overall, as far as how we're deploying, I do want to mention that we are also leveraging local contractors as we make these deployments. So I know some outside contractors have been mentioned, but I would say our primary deployment in this area has been with local contractors that are local either to St. Louis or to the state of Missouri. Our plan is to continue in that way, to deploy in that way. So. Just to kind of talk a little bit more about some of the items that Kyle had mentioned. So, we really look at this as a foundation and a basis for enabling, future technologies. So really we need a strong base of this technology out there to enable some of the broader smart cities type concepts that have been developed and that are in development, as well as future things like autonomous cars and Internet of Things type technologies. And so we really see this as a foundation for that. And we're excited about the development of these and partnering with other companies. We're happy to come back and talk about some of these technologies at a later time. But I did want to mention that these are 5G is enabling these types of technologies for St. Louis and many other cities. I did want to mention, we are talking about ultra wideband deployment at a millimeter wave spectrum, and Verizon is uniquely positioned to be deploying this. It is enabling speeds that are much faster than what we've seen with 4G technologies, and it is also enabling latency that is much lower than what we've seen with 4G technologies as well. So we're happy to come back and talk through some of those as well, but I did want to mention that this is a unique, basically a unique position that Verizon is in at this time and is bringing to the city of St. Louis. And with that, I did want to mention a recent announcement, and so we're here towards the end. I'm not sure if anyone caught the announcement on the 14th when Apple announced their new devices. But this is really talking about 5G and how it's coming into the mainstream and becoming, as we've coined it, 5G is getting real. But We did have a unique opportunity to join Tim Cook at their keynotes announcement a few weeks ago. Our chairman and CEO, Hans Vestberg, joined Tim on the stage and announced the ultra wideband network at 19 additional cities across the United States. And St. Louis was one of them. And so the 5G coming to St. Louis is real. It is live now. And we're very excited about expanding that network even further. And we think with the launch of these types of devices, mainstream Apple type devices, we think that the desire and the community being more and more interested in 5G is about to grow more exponentially as a result of some of these things. So that concludes our presentation from where we're at. So happy to hand it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate that, and everybody else. This was very informative. I'm going to run through the committee list. I know we've lost some members to other hearings, but I'll run through the list and see if we've got any questions. Alderman Vollmer?
No questions whatsoever. Thank you for all the information, everyone. Thank you very much.
All right, Alderwoman Ingracia.
No questions. Thanks. I'm going to leave for health, but appreciate everyone's time and all the information.
Thank you. Alderwoman Navarro, who I think also had to jump in a minute.
Yes. Sorry, I just want to say thank you, and I appreciate all of the conversations that have been happening with Verizon, and I look forward to continuing to work together. I agree that overall this is really good for the city of St. Louis, and we just have a few kinks to work out to make sure that this works for everyone, and we do this in an effective and efficient manner, an equitable manner. So thank you to everyone who presented today, and I will be hopping off. Thank you.
All right, Alderman Narayan.
Nothing from me. Thank you.
All right, Alderman Todd. I don't know if Alderman Todd's still with us. Okay, and me. I do have a couple questions. St. Louis, we're not usually on the forefront of much, so I would like to know, why'd you guys pick St. Louis as, I guess, one of your sort of earlier cities to be rolling out 5G technology?
Steve, would you like to take that one?
I don't care who, anyone can take it.
Yeah, no worries. I think Steve's better positioned to answer it than I am.
Yeah, I mean, we see a lot of exciting things happening in the city of St. Louis, and certainly from a population perspective, we're very interested in going where people are. But when we think about some of the things that are being developed in St. Louis, such as a really thriving healthcare industry and other exciting new things that are coming there, we want to be part of that, and we want to be right beside St. Louis from that perspective. So that's really the reason we want to be here. And I'll tell you, we've been working with the city for quite some time. I'd say multiple years, and we're very excited that it's finally come to this point where we're able to launch a network in the city, and we're really excited about expanding it.
Great. And follow up, how many other cities, obviously you guys have a big national, global network, but how many other cities are you doing something similar in right now, expanding your 5G network?
Yeah, so last year we launched in 30 cities. So we had 30 cities launched in 2019, and then we have launched an additional 26 cities in 2020. So I guess all in, we're at 56 cities across the nation, and we're kind of full steam ahead as we continue to deploy.
Great. And I guess my last question, which is sort of a two-part question, how would you compare our sort of permitting process to what you're experiencing in the other 50 or so cities you're working in? And two, who would you consider, what city would you say is sort of the gold standard? I always like to think, let's not reinvent the wheel. If someone's doing something better than us, where can we look to for guidance? So what would you say has sort of been the gold standard of sort of the cities you've operated in? And you don't have to say St. Louis just to kiss up. I would really like to know who's been doing it best.
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I'll say, as far as in close proximity, we have a really good working relationship and a very smooth process with Kansas City. Kansas City works very well. We partner well with their public works team when we implement and we deploy. But we also have a very smooth permitting process up front. I will say, in addition to that, I would highlight, some of the things we spoke about or that were spoken about earlier with respect to ensuring the community is aware and providing information from a city perspective. I would highlight the City of Denver. City of Denver has an excellent website that provides public information. We've shared that with in our discussions previously. They include a very detailed handout for residents in the city that we partnered with them to develop. But it wasn't just Verizon, it was all the other carriers along with the city as well. And that provided information related to a lot of the things that were just discussed relative to health concerns, relative to what the permitting process is, relative to FCC order and state law, those sorts of things. But as well as some really detailed information around where the deployments are at and how the permitting process works. So those are the two cities that I would highlight as going really smooth that are in relative close proximity to St. Louis.
That's very helpful. I would ask if somebody from Verizon could kick me the link to that Denver site you just referenced, Steve. I'd like to see that. That might be something, you guys are sort of at the forefront here in St. Louis, but as, other carriers, start expanding, you guys shouldn't alone be bearing the brunt of this. If we could have a city hosted website with resources, especially on the health side, which, we get all sorts of emails, blast emails and stuff about people freaked out about 5G technology. It'd be nice to be able to have a one-stop shop to be able to direct people to as this rollout continues. So someone please send me that link. I'd like to talk to Dr. Gaskell Clemens about that. That's really all I have. My closing comments would be where I think everyone would agree that we need to see some improvement is simply just the more the communication with the residents. I appreciate everyone's trying to be very cognizant of where these things are going and to not be blocking sight lines of homes and everything. And I will say Tanya had emailed me when there was going to be some work starting in neighborhoods in the 7th Ward, and I had a little heads up on that. But at the end of the day, I don't know exactly what day, contractors are going to start. So if it's whether we're flyering doors or just posting, some public markings in the area where we're going to be working to say, hey, we're starting this in 5 days or 4 days or whatever it is, just to give people some notice, something pretty basic. I think that would be helpful if we're not already doing that. It doesn't sound, while it might be a permit requirement, I'm not sure it's happening in practice, or at least it wasn't. With that, guys, I really appreciate everyone's time at this. I was, ambitious thinking we'd get this done in 1 hour, but here we are just before the 11 o'clock hour. I guess if there's nothing further, we can adjourn the meeting. Anyone from the committee have anything further?
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second that motion. Hearing no objection, we'll consider this meeting of the Public Utilities Committee. Actually, scratch that. Hold on. I need to excuse the alderman from the 16th Ward. We'll excuse the alderman from the 16th Ward for necessary absence. And with that, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, committee member.
Thank you.